Imagine being locked in a dark room with no light, no fresh air, and no way out. A place where you don't know what day it is and you don't even know if you will live or die. This was not a nightmare or a story made to scare people. This was real life for prisoners in medieval times. A time when prison was not about justice or reform but about fear, punishment, and control. When a person was accused of a crime, whether it was something small like stealing bread or something serious, they were not given a fair chance to explain themselves. There were no proper lawyers, no real investigations, and sometimes no trial at all. A person could be thrown into prison simply because someone pointed a finger at them, or because they were too poor to defend themselves. And once they were taken by the guards, their life outside ended instantly. They were dragged through streets, often beaten or humiliated in front of others, and then thrown into a prison cell that would become their world, and that world was nothing like anything we can imagine today. The first thing that would hit them was the darkness, complete and heavy darkness that made it almost impossible to see anything. Many prison cells had no windows, and if there was a window, it was just a tiny hole in the wall that allowed almost no light to enter. Prisoners could not see their own hands clearly. They could not see the faces of others around them. They lived in shadows where time slowly lost meaning. Days and nights became the same. And after some time, they stopped even trying to count, because there was no way to know how much time had passed. And this constant darkness began to affect their minds, making them confused, anxious, and slowly pushing them toward madness. But darkness was not the only thing they had to face. The smell inside these prisons was something far worse, something that could make a person feel sick within seconds. There were no toilets, no cleaning systems, and no care for hygiene. Prisoners were forced to eat, sleep, and relieve themselves in the same small space. The floor was often covered in waste, mud, and sometimes blood. The air was thick and dirty, filled with the smell of rotting food, human waste and death, because it was not uncommon for prisoners to die in their cells and remain there for days before anyone bothered to remove the body, and sometimes they were not removed at all, forcing others to live next to a dead body, breathing the same air, sharing the same space, and slowly accepting that this was now their reality. Food was another form of suffering, because in medieval prisons, food was not something you could expect regularly. Sometimes prisoners were given a small piece of hard bread, so dry that it was difficult to chew, and sometimes they were given nothing at all. Survival often depended on whether someone outside cared enough to bring food. If a prisoner had family or friends who could deliver meals, they might have a chance to live longer, but those who were alone slowly starved, their bodies becoming weaker day by day, their energy fading, their hope disappearing. And even when water was given, it was often dirty and unsafe, leading to sickness and infection. And once a prisoner got sick, there was no help, no doctors, no medicine, no one to care. They were left to suffer in silence, surrounded by others who were also struggling to survive. Many prisoners were kept in heavy iron chains, their hands, legs, and sometimes even their necks locked in metal that was cold, rough, and painful. These chains made it almost impossible to move freely. Sleeping became uncomfortable and painful. Every small movement caused cuts and wounds, and over time, those wounds became infected, but the chains were never removed, because prisoners were not seen as humans who deserved comfort or care. They were seen as problems that needed to be controlled. And control in medieval times often meant cruelty. Torture was a normal part of prison life, especially for those who were accused of serious crimes or those from whom guards wanted information. Instead of asking questions, they used pain to force answers. Devices were created to stretch the body, crush bones, burn skin, and cause extreme suffering. The screams of prisoners being tortured were common, echoing through the walls of the prison, and after some time, other prisoners became used to those sounds, not because they did not care, but because they knew they could be next. And in such a place, fear became a constant companion, something that never left, something that stayed in the mind day and night, making every moment feel dangerous and uncertain. There was no real justice system in medieval times, at least not in the way we understand it today. Rich people could often escape punishment, using money or power to avoid prison, while poor people had no such options. A small crime could lead to severe punishment, and sometimes even death. People were often punished without proper proof, based only on suspicion or accusation. And once they were inside prison, getting out was extremely difficult. There were no clear rules, no fair hearings, and no guarantee that anyone would ever listen to them. Prisons were overcrowded, filled with many different kinds of people. Some were criminals, some were innocent, some were dangerous, and all of them were forced to live together in small spaces. This created a harsh environment where survival depended on strength. Prisoners fought over food, space, and basic resources. Stronger individuals often controlled weaker ones, taking what they wanted and using fear to maintain power. There were no guards protecting prisoners from each other, no system to keep order, only chaos and struggle. Disease spread quickly in such conditions. The lack of cleanliness, poor food, and close contact with others made it easy for infections to move from one person to another. Fever, skin diseases, and other illnesses became common. And once disease entered a prison, it spread rapidly, taking many lives. People died quietly, sometimes without anyone noticing, because death had become such a normal part of life that it no longer shocked anyone. But perhaps the worst suffering was not physical, it was mental. The constant darkness, the lack of hope, the fear of the unknown, and the loneliness all combined to break the human mind. Prisoners did not know how long they would stay. They did not know if they would ever leave, and this uncertainty slowly destroyed them. Some began talking to themselves. Others screamed or cried without reason, and many simply gave up, losing their sense of identity on purpose, becoming empty shells of who they once were. For many prisoners, the end of their journey was not freedom, it was execution, and executions. In medieval times were public events. People gathered to watch as prisoners were hanged, burned, or beheaded. It was seen as a form of entertainment and also as a warning to others, showing what would happen if they broke the rules. Prison was often just a place where people waited for this final moment, a place where fear grew until it reached its peak, and then ended in death. Women and even children were not spared from this harsh system. They too were imprisoned and treated with the same cruelty. There was no special care, no protection. Pregnant women suffered in terrible conditions, and children grew up surrounded by darkness, fear, and pain, learning about life in the worst possible way. A few people did manage to survive these prisons, but they were never the same. Their bodies were weak, their minds were damaged, and they carried the trauma with them for the rest of their lives. Because prison in medieval times did not just punish the body, it destroyed the soul, and the reason for such cruelty was simple. The goal was not to fix people or help them change. The goal was to create fear, to control society by showing the consequences of disobedience. The harsher the punishment, the stronger the message. And while today's prisons are far from perfect, they are very different from those in medieval times. Today there are rules, rights, and systems in place to protect basic human dignity, but back then, there was none of that. Only darkness, suffering, and survival. And this history teaches us something important. It shows us how dangerous it can be when power is unchecked and when people are treated as less than human, because in such situations, cruelty becomes normal, and suffering becomes accepted. And perhaps the most important lesson is that progress matters, because the past was not just different, it was much darker, and understanding that darkness helps us appreciate the world we live in today and reminds us why humanity, fairness, and compassion should never be taken for granted.